That's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about simplifying winter feeding, basically saving time and money through simplicity and elimination. Okay.
Sounds
So
great.
what's that?
Sounds great.
Okay. This is, these are pictures from the Eden Shield farm. This is one of the existing winter feeding sites that we had when the university controlled this farm. This farm is basically, it's a ridge farm that breaks off into 12 and 20% slopes, and those break off into 20 and 30. But you can see the pugging that we've got going on at this particular farm. Let's see if I can get this to do this. There you go. And then we've also done some rutting up, where we've basically done some concentrated diets in these portable bunkers, and you can see the rutting that we've done from tractor tires. And what you've got is, if you've lost about a foot of soil right here, it's gone. It's not down at the bottom of the hill. It's in the Mississippi. And that topsoil is your ability to grow grass. Once that's gone, the only thing we're going to grow right there is cockabers. But what we did was we came into this area and we put in basically the fence line feeders, or the cubbies as we call them. But these fence line feeders, you can basically load them in from the road, okay? And we built several different models, okay? And just basically different prices and different components and materials that you could use to construct these. But what I want to talk to you about is basically the science of where, okay? Because here's this feeding site that we've got. It's right next to the road, so basically it makes it convenient for us to feed, so we don't have to go open the gate, get off the tractor, and go in with the animals to feed. We're not rutting up the field with the tractor and all that other kind of stuff. We don't need four-wheel drive, front-wheel assist, anything like that to feed. We can just feed right here. And then here they are all in a line up on this ridge, okay? And this is a ground shot of that ridge. And so what I've got is I've got the water on this bridge. It's basically breaking to the left and the right, okay? You don't want to have this water running into that feeding area, because it's just going to make a loblolly, okay? Here's a topo of the farm right here, and I'll get a laser pointer here. And I'll show you that basically this is where that feeding area is. And so it's right on the top of that ridge. So water is breaking to the left and it's breaking to the right, all right? So when you talk about efficient feeding concepts, this is what you should be doing. Feed should be moved as little as possible from the point of production to the cow's mouth. Feed should be moved in bulk. Feed should be self-fed. Feed should be consumed with as little waste as possible. We've already talked some about waste, but I want to talk about logistics, okay? So here's our feeding sites right here, our cubbies, right off the farm road, okay? Here's our hoop barns where the feed is stored. So how far do you have to drive to fill up these racks? Somebody's saying not very far, or everybody's saying not very far to yourself. But the point is the farther that distance becomes, the more this design is more dysfunctional it is, okay? And so one of the things is like on this design right there where that laser pointer is a two-hole water. All right, well, if you got water and feed in the same location, there is no motivation for those cattle to leave. They will just sit there and eat and drink. What you want to do is you want to motivate cattle to do their normal habits, all right, and eating and drinking. So what we've done is, after we installed these, we harnessed a spring over in this area, and we developed that spring and sent it over to a water that's right here in between these two pastures. So we have one water feeding two pastures, but these cattle, in order to get a drink, they need to take a walk over here. And that's what we want them to do. We want to motivate them to walk, all right? Or to leave that area. Otherwise, there's more manure for you to clean up in this area if water's in the same location. So what I just showed you, all right, is basically what we call a farm layout in a small sense. Basically where the hay is stored and where you feed, all right? And a farm layout is the relation of the fields, the gates, the lanes, the waters, the roads, etc., everything, to the buildings and to the buildings to each other. And it's also the interior layout of the buildings as well. But a desirable layout is necessary in order to economize labor and enhance the value of the operation and the property, okay? So here is a farm layout, okay? And basically this farmer, the path that he has to take to feed is that squiggly red line that you see, which is just craziness to me, okay? But you're really not even seeing the crazy part. The crazy part is right here, where it says repeat 8 times, okay? And so this is this guy's path. This is what he was doing. This was his daily thing, never even thought about it. But someone comes along to his farm and says, hey, let me show you how to change your layout. And so this is the same farm, and all they've done is they've changed the layout. But as you can see, what we've got now is now he has a fence line feeding system, and hardcore is essentially heavy traffic pads, geotextile fabric and rock, concrete, whatever. But his path and his his route of feeding is significantly reduced, okay? Now, farm layouts and infrastructure are often given too little or no consideration at all, which usually results in an arrangement that is neither simplistic or systematic for labor efficiency and livestock production, okay? So I got a video, all right? So I'm gonna show you this. This is a barn that's at the, it's at the bull barn at Eden Shale. And let's see, how do I do this? Uh-oh, hold on. Okay, so what it is basically I've done a time motion study. We got a drone running right here. And what I got is we got this tractor and with this roll bale on there. And as soon as it passes this gate right here, I'm gonna time it. So I started a stopwatch right now. And I asked these guys, I'm like, okay, I want you to feed the way you normally feed, all right? And so here he comes around with the tractor. He's got one roll bale on there. He's got to come around here. He's on a highway right now, 55 miles an hour. And then he's got to pull in here. And the film takes a skip, but I'm still timing it. Well, what he's got to do right here is he's got to unlock this gate. And he's got to back this 85 horsepower tractor in here because of the way the gates swing in order to get this roll bale in. Now, this job right here requires a tractor and the operator, but you have to have a second guy in here to basically prevent escapes from happening, which is getting ready to happen right now, okay? So he's got to back up a little bit more. I paused it a little bit on the stopwatch. We're going to get it. All right, so now he's coming. All right, here comes your escape. All right, so he goes back, and now they're taking this roll bale, and they're going to pop it into this ring feeder. And now that roll bale is sitting outside, and it's sitting in 6 inches of muck and manure, okay? And so now I stopped the stopwatch. Now we started again, and I said, okay, I want you to feed the way I want you to feed, okay? And so he's coming around this way. Same route, essentially, all right? And this isn't even counting how many time it took to get to this point, but all right, so right here, he gets on this road. This road here is an artifact. They don't use it anymore. And then I came up to the barn, and I actually cut these openings in the side of the barn, and I cut the openings in, so basically he can just drive up and basically take that roll bale and now stick it under roof, okay? But this operation right here only requires a tractor and an operator. You don't need the second man because there's no gates to open. And then basically the stopwatch stops again, okay? So in comparing those two designs, okay, the one that takes, my route basically takes one worker and it took 2.5 minutes versus the other route, which took 2 workers and took 4.5 minutes. If you do a cost benefit analysis on this, there were 72 bales that were fed at this site, okay? So 72 bales times 2.5 minutes is 1.5 hours versus 5.5 hours, okay? But there's a difference in rate, okay? If I have a tractor and an operator, that's $30 an hour. If I have a tractor and 2 operators, that's $40 an hour. So you're looking at a cost of $45 versus $220, okay? That's a 5-fold difference or a 500% difference. And this is also assuming, you know, because one of the roll bales on the outside and one it's on the inside is other. And then we also have this confinement where different ways of feeding. So you're going to have different waste. Okay. So then also too, with the other route, you basically had to open up gates, and gates can be a nuisance. They can be effective and they can be a nuisance. I've been on a lot of farms, and I have been probably on one where the gates actually swung freely. Most of the time, we're not opening the gate, we're dragging it open and we're dragging it closed, okay? And then I've got some producers, they might open anywhere between 4 to 20 gates just to feed, say, 5 roll bales for that particular day. And so gates can be a nuisance, all right? This system right here, where we basically put those roll bales on the inside, this is what we call a 2 roll bale cubby or 2 roll bale feeder. In installing this, that's basically 2.5 yards of concrete, and we actually used 3 existing posts. So we only had to add 1 post plus the panels, and we're done. But see, nothing is done basically in isolation, okay? So in doing that, we opened up the side of the barn to put in those feeders, which modified the ventilation. While we're at it, we also improved the flooring, and been opening up the side, we actually improved the light. We also added manure storage onto this structure. We added shade structures, and there was already a handling facility existing. So there's the 2 roll bale feeder that's in the back, but we also did the floor, and the floor actually is a plastic grid that you actually roll this out. This is a 4-foot by 150-foot roll that you can roll out, and you can basically interlock these things. And basically what happens is when you put gravel on the top of this or inside those holes, when you come in with a blade to scrape this, you cannot go past that plastic. So you're not hauling out any rock. You're not hitting any soft spots. You're not cutting into the ground or the earth of the barn. This is your surface right here, indestructible. I also did another example where basically I'm using tire cylinders, where we basically put these tire cylinders down on top of geotextile fabric, and then we back drag that with rock, and then that becomes our final surface. So again, a blade on a scraper blade is not going to be able to cut into that rubber. And so we did this on a barn, okay, and I'm shifting gears on you, and I just want you to think, what is the purpose of a building, okay? What is the purpose of a building on your farm? Because most people are going to sit there and think for a while, and they're going to say shelter. And yes, it is. It does provide shelter. But a barn, in my opinion, provides about 7 different things. And in order, probably the 7th one is shelter. So it does 6 other things ahead of this, okay? And I'm going to show you. This is a barn on your typical farm, okay? And this is an old tobacco barn. So basically, there's no tobacco in it. So basically, we're just using it for junk storage. And when you store stuff on the floor like this, that is the most inefficient way of storing anything, because it takes up a 2-dimensional space on the floor, but it's taking up all that cubic area up above it, okay? So this is a barn that's on the Eden Shale farm. It is a combination livestock barn, tobacco barn. The only entrance that you can get a tractor in is through the main alley, which is not good because tractors and barns should complement each other. Instead, we've got new tractors that don't fit in the old barns, but that's just the way it is. So we took this barn, and here's the inside of it for real. Basically, it was just storage, but it had a concrete floor in this barn. And I thought, well, that's a waste. We need to utilize this. So you can actually take a building or a structure, and you can actually reprogram it, okay? You can get it to do other things for you. In this case, this is a rendering of where we were basically using that center alleyway as a storage structure for hay taken out from the hay field, but we also put on a self-feeder or a feed rack on the front end of this. And so what this allows you to do is all this hay is being in here and stored, and then the cattle come up on this approach right here, they stick their heads in here, they start eating, but this rack, this feed barrier, is on rails. So they have access to all of this hay that's in this barn. This is where it is. This is actually stored. It's actually too high. This was put in here in the barn in June. This is the actual feeding face. Actually, when we put it in June, you can see that center bale is actually a little higher, but by the time it gets down to this time of the year, that bale with gravity is basically sunk down. And then we put a heavy traffic pad in front of them, because basically the cattle are going to come up here. They're going to approach this. They're going to stick their heads through here and eat. And as they eat, basically it's going to give them access to the rest of the 30 bales. Now, here's the deal with this particular structure. The hay is inside versus storing it outside, which is going to reduce spoilage. Larry's already told you about how quickly you can pay for a barn that's basically used for storage. If you actually use it for self-feeding, it actually pays for itself even faster. Now, the width on this barn was basically, it's about 13 feet wide. And if you allow 2 feet per animal, basically a guy can only get about 6 or 7 animals in here at one time. But this hay is here 24/7. It is free choice feed. So you can have animals coming in groups. When I design something like this, even though it only allows like 7 animals to eat at a time, I can multiply that number times 3, because that's the animals that it'll actually serve, which is around 21 animals. But some people actually think it'll actually serve more than that, okay? To build that rack and that track costs me around $3,500. And some people just want to look at that and go, wow, that's a lot of money. But you're looking at it in isolation, okay? I spent on there the heavy traffic pads for the gravel and the fabric, and I added a couple of gates and about 300 feet of fence too. But again, nothing's done in isolation. So this is basically a hay field. This is an endophyte-free fescue field, and so this is field 66. This is the barn that we're looking at right here. And so what I've done is I've added these 2 little yellow fences in here, and I've cleaved this little area off of this huge hay field so that these animals can come in here and have access to this barn and eat, okay? Zooming in on it a little bit, basically the animals are going to eat off the south end of the barn, which is going to have most of the sunshine. You can see I've got gates in here and here, which basically interface this area or this hub in with other pastures for the rotational grazing. But all I had to add was basically this little section of red fence here and here. All these gates were already here. Had to add the heavy traffic pad with this in here. But this is where the hay field is. So we're baling the hay and we're putting it in this barn in June, and we're done. We peel off the strings at that time, and it is ready to feed in June. But we're not going to feed it until January. But the point is we only move that hay one time, okay? So a building, when considered as a static structure, can only serve as a shelter or as storage space, whereas its real value is measured in terms of what it can contribute to an operations capacity through planned arrangement, control of the environment, and facilities for storage and conditioning, management, sanitation, and saving of labor. Most of this is going to come clear to you. Now, going back to the science of where, what I like to do is I like to use maps, okay? Maps are great. So this is the farm in question that we're focusing on for this particular study, and this is just a brain dump of my perspective, but this is a 900-acre farm, and what you can see is the fields that are pastures or the lime green, and you can see the woods, and the dark colored green is a section of woods that the cattle actually have access to in the wintertime. The beige areas are hay fields, okay? So let me show you something. So these hay fields are basically beige, and the size of that yellow circle there is the number or the quantity or scale of the number of bales that come out of that hay field, okay? All of that hay is brought up, and basically it's moved on the farm roads and highways to basically go to a centralized storage structure, one storage structure, okay? And then from there, it's stored there, and then after that, when winter feeding comes, then it's distributed from there, okay? So, hold on a second. All right. Wait a minute. Uh-oh. It's kind of locking up on me. Hang on a second. Okay. Okay, so now this slide is showing you the hay fields, and they're in green because that's where you start, okay? And then all the hay goes to this storage structure. But then afterwards, when it comes time to winter feeding, you distribute the hay to the red circles, okay? Which is where the winter feeding takes place. And the size of that red circle, again, is indicative of how many roll bales or how much feeding actually takes place to that. But something I want you to notice is if you're in a hay field down here and you come up all the way up to this storage structure, you're actually passing up several feeding sites along the way. So when you go back in the wintertime to feed, you're actually backtracking, okay? Come on, come on. Okay. So when I brought this issue up, that basically you're backtracking and you're wasting time driving a tractor, I actually had a producer that actually, he jumped on me. He got on me pretty good. And what he told me was, he was like, I actually enjoy driving my tractor. And I have no problem with driving tractors, okay? But my point is basically what I think is going on is there could be a bad design. And what we're doing is we're compensating for bad design by driving a tractor to bridge the distance, okay? And on cost of things, you know, I normally would charge a tractor and an operator $30 an hour, but if someone's using this for therapy, okay, because they like to drive their tractor, then I'm going to charge you $300 an hour, and I'm going to pay for these structures pretty quick, okay? So, and going back to this, okay, so basically what I've got here is I got a beige hay field where a huge amount of hay is being produced, and I got this white circle on there. And so my thing is if the hay is being produced here, why don't we try to feed it here? And so that is where this structure comes into place, which I've already talked about, because now this structure acts as a hub. We take the hay from here, we store it in here, it's ready to feed, and we feed it out of here. We're already feeding animals in this area in the wintertime, so now this area is a new addition, which allows us to split up the herd. Maybe we'll have the heifers over here and the calves over here, okay? So then this area, it's like a red circle. A whole lot of hay is being fed right there. And so what do we do with that? Well, that's where we have this structure. We just put a hoop barn over this. And this, again, is a large self-feeder. It is a storage structure that is also a self-feeder. This is around 22 feet wide, which allows several animals to eat at one time, around 11. But if you multiply that again times 3, this structure will serve at least 33 animals, okay? And then this is the back side of it. So basically I can come into this compound and I can load the structure without getting in the cattle. I'm on gravel. I never have to get off of a gravel road to do this feeding. Here are all the feeding sites. There's about 13 different feeding sites on this farm, and they're all identified basically by this blue animal. And what you're seeing right here identified is basically it's 15 or 15.99 minutes to feed round trip here. And it's 11:09 and 14. You get down to these other ones, it's 26 minutes and 24 and 29. And here's another one that's 35 minutes. And that's a round trip, okay? but there's actually more time involved in that because there's equipment set up and you got to drive to the hoop barn to get the hay, and then you got to drive from there. So I just used, okay, an analysis of, all I did was just figure out, what if it took me 20 minutes? Even though these other figures are longer than 20 minutes, what if it took me 20 minutes to feed? Well, I looked at several different feeding hay fields, so the hay field going to the storage structure, and then from the storage structure to where they fed. And so what it's costing me is around $21.60. Here's $20.50. So to feed 30 bales of hay, it's costing me around $648 here. It's costing me around $615 here. These are basically two identical structures, okay? But this other structure that I just showed you, where the hay is going into that barn at the time of harvest and we're not moving it anymore, it's $10 a bale or $300 for 30 bales. That's a difference of $350 easy, okay? And this is for a 20-minute route, all right, round trip. So these structures right here that are circled right here, there's 3 feeding areas that are in this. Well, what these are is basically barns, okay? These are feeding barns that we feed at. And what I found out in doing this analysis was that basically 89% of all of our hay is fed at barns or at these structures, okay? So what we've done is instead of using that centralized storage, I'm like, well, wait, there's a barn over here that we could use. Let's throw a couple of roll bales in here so we don't have to drive back, okay? We could put hay in this barn back over in here, and then we load it into here. So if hay is stored here and you're feeding it here, you don't have to drive very far. And the hay field that we could actually be loading this up with is just right over the road. It's just right over the hill, okay? So basically what you're doing is you're eliminating distances. Now, big picture, okay? There are components of beef cattle production. Basically, you need to have feeding areas. You need to have housing. You need to have a watering system. You need to have storage for commodities, for hay, for equipment. You got to do nutrient management, sanitation. Basically, you got to clean up manure is what you got to do. And you got to haul it. You got to have handling facilities. You need to have shelter sometimes for those cattle. Many people look at these components as separate things. What I think we ought to be doing is thinking of creating hubs where more than one activity is going on at one location, where you are combining these activities to save yourself time and distance. And what that would look like is something like this. This is an old drawing of basically hay storage and bedding with a hay feeding area, okay? Here's another one. This is also a 1950s design of hay storage, or actually this is hay feeding. This is actually, if you look at this, this is a feeding barrier. This is a self-feeder right here, okay? You also got loose housing. But what you do is you think about combining things like, all right, well, let's add in manure storage into this. Let's add into a lane so we can move cattle from one place to another. Let's put in manure storage, okay? There's a lot of things you can do with these centralized locations. Now, there's 2 little sites right here. There's a little red dot right here, and there's a little tiny little red dot right here, and I got circles on both of them. Both of those structures that we feed at are really far, and it's really expensive to feed there. But I don't look at how expensive it is to feed there. I look at how much traffic it receives. If we're not feeding a whole lot of bales, then I'm not going to sink a lot of money into it. But this site right here, this is an interesting site that's over here because it's kind of landlocked, because I have these woods that separate this area from the rest of the farm. And I have access to some of these other hay fields, which are also pastures that we can graze. So maybe I need to do something right here, okay? Like a storage structure and a self-feeder or whatnot. Now, with that perspective, I want to tell you, I want to make a point clear to you. And the point that I'm going to make is by example of what we used to do when we controlled this farm. When we controlled this farm, the hoop barns are right here. And basically what they would do is they would put someone on a tractor and they would move to do hay feeding, 2 roll bales. And the person would drive this route down here. They would get on this highway, which is a 55-mile-an-hour highway. They get to this intersection right here, which is a stop sign, and they got to make a left turn in front of a blind curve where people are going 55 miles an hour. And this is an upgraded highway with guardrails. Then they drive down this way and they get to this point right here, and they got to make a left-hand turn across oncoming traffic around this blind curve at 55 miles an hour. They got to open up a gate right here. They got to, oh, sorry. They got to drive down this hill, okay, this gravel road, and they get down to the bottom where this red dot is, and they feed right there, okay? This is probably the longest distance on the farm that I can measure. It's 1.69 miles one way. 0.72 miles is on a 55-mile-an-hour highway. You have to open up 10 gates. Depending on where a roll bale was harvested, that roll bale might travel 10 miles on the farm before it is consumed at that site, okay? So it's a ridiculous distance. But I want to show you something else. I showed you this feeding site earlier where basically they take this roll bale and they put it in this ring feeder. And now, so basically that roll bale is going to basically, it's going to get rained on and it's going to suck up some of that muck and manure off the bottom, all right? Now, here's an aerial photograph of that barn. And what I've done is basically, there's a ring that's right there and there's a ring that's right there because you can see the hay around it. But there was a ring that was right here. So when I look at that ring, when it rains on it, basically it's just going to intercept the rain that's going to hit the top of the bale. If it's a 5x5 bale, then basically 25 square feet of intercepted rain is going to occur here. But this bale is sitting on this concrete with a 2% slope. So I get this little uphill area, that little blue rectangle square right there is also going to contribute watershed area to this bale, okay? So let's say it's 100 square feet, all right? This roll bale that's right here on this dry lot, that would be in a ring feeder, okay, it's going to intercept that 25 square feet of rain as well, but it's also going to intercept this roof area and this gravel here area right here, because that's the watershed area that's it's going to intercept. And let's say that that's 200 square feet, okay? This area right here, where they used to feed, all right, includes all these draws and this lake right here and this area right here, which is a 155-acre watershed. They're feeding down below a 155-acre watershed, which is 6,751,800 square feet. It is also a 150-foot drop in elevation from this point right here to this point right here. All right, so this is the fields, okay? This is where they used to feed. Now what's going on is the cattle would be in this field, okay, in this red one, and there's a water source right there at that blue dot and a water source right there at that blue dot. And so they would let them eat this grass in this field, and they got to walk from this point to the water. It's about 2,800 feet, which is too far. But after they graze this, they would move them into this white area, okay? There is no water there. So while they were there, they had to walk all the way back here to get a drink. Once they started eating down this grass, they would open up this field and let them have access to this so they could get down here in the bottom of this creek and get some water from there. So my point is the reason why these guys picked this feeding area and were doing this stuff they were basically just served to do was because they didn't develop the water for the farm, okay? All the feeding sites that are on this map that I've basically played with and developed with fence line feeders and cubbies and self feeders of various sizes, I had to develop the water at each one of those sites in order for those structures to basically serve everything, okay? This is something else you can get from a map. What this is basically color coding of the hydrologic soil groups, okay? Ideally, you want to feed on a B, on a soil class of a B, because it's a well-drained soils. The only B soils are basically down in here in the bottom, okay, down along the creek and the river that's down in here, which is well-drained soils, but it's also susceptible to flooding. So that's not going to work. So only C's that I've got on this farm is as good as I can get towards a B, and that is exactly where I have placed all my feeding sites, okay? This site that was down here that intercepted all that water is not from me, okay? So anyway, consider this. There was a 5-fold difference between using that feeding in that cubby in the barn versus feeding on the outside, okay? Many studies have found a 5- or 6-fold difference between feeding and hauling hay. Some studies have shown a 7-fold difference, a 13-fold difference, a 20-fold difference, and a 40-fold difference. So let me give you an example. If it takes me 5 minutes to do feeding, it's taken someone else over 2 hours, okay? And those wide differences is basically room for it's bad efficiency, but there's a lot of room for improvement. Now consider, on this particular farm, there are 13 feeding sites. If I'm saving $150 here and $225 there and $350 there, it adds up pretty quick, okay? So simplification is the systematic development and use of easier, quicker, and more economical ways to do a job. Labor saving is mainly a matter of simplifying and, if possible, eliminating the transportation of materials. There are no gates to open, so there's no reason to shut the tractor down, get off, open the gate, drive back in, shut it down again, close the gate. There's none of that. You get to feed without getting off the pavement. There's no reason to go into the field. And so what you're doing is you're reducing the travel distance. What I've shown you, okay, in these structures, the fence line feeders and the cell feeders, they are labor-saving designs, okay? Labor-saving designs, they cost money, but what they can do is they can increase your profits by being able to manage more animals in a given amount of time, provided that the operation has the ability to expand. They can reduce drudgery. They can provide continuous production, automatic operation without supervision. They create simplicity. And in some cases, you'll get better animal performance and quality because you're also adding in heavy traffic pads and you're improving the watering system, okay? These systems are not designed to drastically lower production costs per animal. They're designed to save you labor. Now, I want to end with this, okay? Here's a picture of some bats hanging from a cage, okay? Look at it, all right? That's the same picture turned upside down. To me, that looks like these bats are partying, okay? It's the same picture, all right? Now, read this sentence for me. Count how many letter F's are in this sentence. The letter F. Count them. You ready? How many did you get? Some people, most people, they get 3, okay? There's 6. There's 6 F's in that sentence. And if you only saw 3 of them, now you see the other ones. And now you can't not see them, okay? The point is this. What I wanted you to do with this presentation was basically to change your perspective, to get you to look at your farm from a different view. Mostly those views from me are from maps where I'm looking down on a farm, okay? And also, I subscribe to this philosophy that 95% of what I see every day is invisible, okay? Unless you actually open your eyes and you actually start looking around things. The hope in this presentation is that maybe in a couple weeks when you get on your farm again, maybe you'll see it in a different way. And maps can help you see your farm in a different way. They can show you problems. They can show you solutions. They can show you alternatives and options. They may show you how to have a better life, how to be happier, how to reduce the drudgery on your animals. They may even show you how to be more competitive and more efficient. And with that, so there's your maps, basically providing a different perspective, demonstrating patterns and connections and relationships so that the next time you view your farm, maybe you will see things that you never saw before. And with that, I'm done.
All right. Thank you, Steve. I appreciate you doing that for us. I do have a couple questions in the chat box that I'm going to read to you.
Okay.
Somebody was asking about a contact or more info on the interlocking plastic grid that you was using there in the bull barn.
Yes, I use, I consult with companies that basically do roadside stabilization. So basically these are companies that sell to highway departments or road departments for erosion control and that type of work on highway projects. So they'll places that sell geotextile fabric probably would sell that plastic grid.
Okay. Also, they want to know, what is your thoughts on gravel versus chert as a filler or a base?
Chert, basically, I mean, when I think of chert, basically it's angular rock. It's associated with clay soils. It's usually like an angular rock, if that's what I'm thinking of. Angular rocks are superior compared to round rocks. You hardly can't get round rocks to jack in and be compacted. But if you use an angular rock with a lot of sand or a lot of dust, you can actually get it to lock in pretty good. I would also look at the cost. So yes, if you can use chert, sounds pretty good to me.
I'm sure you're aware, you know, now we have, with our Tennessee Ag Enhancement, we have a cost share program, and this year they decided to fund the fence line hay feeders down here, and I've been getting a lot of questions about the feed pad that goes under these feeders. And a guy that called me the other day and wanted to know how important it was that the pad inside the feeders need to be elevated. You recommend 6 inches. Could you kind of expound on why you think it's important that that be raised up higher than the surrounding pad?
So if you actually watch cattle grazing, and when they're traversing or walking across a field, what you'll notice is that they're split-legged. when they have to eat. And basically they use that, basically it allows them to get lower to the ground. So in order for the cow to eat what you want her to eat, she needs to be eating off of a table, and that's basically, that table height is 6 inches for me. If you get much lower, then basically you're going to create a strain on her, especially the way we do feeders, because we're doing feeders that are vertical, and that puts a lot of stress on her shoulder. If you actually looked at feeder design, the feeder should actually kick away from the cow about 15 or 20 degrees. And so that takes off that pressure off her shoulder height and allows her to put her head in a grazing position, which is what you want, because when a cow's head is in a grazing position, she actually creates more slava, which makes the rumen more efficient. So yes, cattle want to eat off of a table, and a 6-inch height is good. If you raise that table up to something ridiculous like 12 or 18 inches, and you feed animals a mixed diet, well, they'll pick through it. And so you don't want that. So 6 inches is the kind of the maximum height, and it's also the minimum height for me.
Another question I've been getting here lately is about the width of the fence line hay feeders.
Yes.
Can you tell us again why you think most of your designs are 8 foot wide on those feeders?
Actually, I typically go with the 7.5, center to center on the panels, on the feed panels. And sometimes that ends up, for some people, that ends up being 8 foot on some of the designs that we've done. But, and that's only a 1/2 foot, but a 1/2 foot can make a significant difference. So here's what you might want to notice. One thing is a lot of that dimension depends on the size of the roll bales. So if the roll bale is pressed up against the rack, then what you're going to have is more waste, because the cow doesn't have to stick her head through the rack to eat. So she'll drop a lot of it on the ground, especially if there's competition and she gets head butted, she will definitely drop what's in her mouth. But if the rack is basically more narrow, then basically she'll get her head in there. And so she can also eat, and she'll just leave a small little pyramid of what she can't reach. If you go with an 8-foot width, you're going to have more hay left inside, which is not necessarily a detriment, because it's not wasted unless it's outside for me. And then when you put in the next roll bale, it'll push that hay up against the back, which if it's good quality hay, they'll eat it at that time. But the stuff that I've normally read and looked at, basically an animal can stretch its head or neck and reach about 3 feet 8 inches. So if you go with a 7.5 foot structure center to center, they ought to be able to clean up the bulk of it. But if you're feeding fat bales, then you need a wider structure. Otherwise, they're going to pull a lot of it out. So that's not really a good answer either way, but it kind of gives you an idea.
Oh, I have seen some that were built at 6 foot widths, and I have noticed that a lot of times that cow takes that bite of hay, she'll take a step back, and anything that falls out of her mouth will be trampled at her feet.
Yeah, if she drops it on the outside of the feeder, she's never going to look at it again.
Correct. Got a question here. You got any suggestions on feeders for Longhorns?
Do like Larry said, and basically roll it out and make them clean it up. If you get any kind of rack, or most of the feed racks that I'm going to be dealing with, most of them are going to have verticals installed. And the vertical is basically to keep cows eating what they're, on their own plate, so to speak. If you've got any kind of verticals and you're trying to get a Longhorn's head in there, it's probably going to have an accident and strangle itself and break its neck. So I would probably just roll it out, or set out a bale, which is a tremendous amount of waste. Cables might be another way to do it, where you run basically horizontal cables and have plenty of space for it to maneuver its head and get it underneath there to get a bite. Other than that, that's as far as my mind takes me.
Okay. Before we let you go, do you got any designs in the works that you're privileged to share?
So, we've done the barn alley feeder. We've got that, and the Cattlemen's Association, Kentucky Cattlemen's Association, has those plans. So other than the cubbies and some of those other larger feeders, no, that's all I've got is those for right now. Okay. Other than just basically expanding on what Larry was talking about, in that having a centralized storage structure is probably not the best thing. You need to have storage structures where you feed, and the capacity of those storage structures needs to meet the capacity of how much hay you're actually feeding at that site. So if you're feeding 30 bales at that barn, you build a barn that holds 30 roll bales. But the other part about it is you can build a barn for storage, but you can also make that barn so it's a self-feeder. So it allows you for those animals to feed themselves. I mean, I've got a 30 and a 32 roll bale feeder right now that is continuous. And if you look at the average herd size in Kentucky at 27 head, 27 cows, that's enough to feed them for a month without firing up the tractor. And I think that's pretty impressive. And if you got more animals than that, then basically it's just a scalable thing, scalable design.
One thing that I did do for everyone that's listening, I did put a link to all of Dr. Steve Higgins' publications at the University of Kentucky in the chat box. I would encourage you to go check those out. A lot of those are 2 or 3 pages, so it don't take a whole lot of time, but there's a wealth of information, and he's done a lot of good things in those publications. So I suggest that you go check those out. Also, there's a link to the Eden Shell Farm, and Steve and Dan Miller and Greg up there do a good job of doing some real world stuff. And they do a blog every month, and they got some videos, and they got some resources on the Eden Shell Farm website. So I encourage you to go check that out. I think they got a really neat project going on up there. I would also suggest that if you haven't already, be sure to put your name, county, and state in the chat box so we know that you were here. I know some of you are doing this for your master beef credit, so be sure to do that. Does anyone have any more questions before I let our presenters go for the evening? Steve, I'm very proud you was on with us tonight. I appreciate your time a whole lot.
Anytime, man. Anytime. Thank you very much, Matt. Appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Yes, sir. And we're going to, hopefully when this COVID gets out of the way, we're going to come see you before too long.
Okay.